And finally, I got to tell him something. So I said, I started explaining how to ski and how to turn. And I don't even know what I'm talking about because I hadn't skied and I'm like turning like a bike, which is totally wrong. And he just looks at me and he shoots down to the bottom of the hill and he banks this turn back into the line.
So, Robert Delena, you co-wrote a book with your son named Without Restraint: How Skiing Saved My Son's Life. Now, I invited you on the podcast because I want to hear a little bit of Ryan's story, but I'm also interested in your story as a parent. So, without further ado, we'll just jump right into it. Can you give me a little bit of background on Ryan, his diagnosis, and the age where he ultimately discovered skiing?
Yeah, so it's I'll try to summarize it as best I can. Ryan was very much a typical kid, and I think we were, the typical American family. My wife and I had, sort of grown up in a blue collar background. Our parents, was sort of worked hard so we could get educated, and then we both became attorneys, and we moved to the suburbs, and we had bought a big house, and we had this the American dream rolling, and then Ryan comes along, and he was a typical boy. He didn't listen. He did whatever he wanted. He never stopped moving. He climbed everything. He loved hearing the word no because it just, emboldened him to try to find a workaround. And he was a fun kid to parent, honestly, in the beginning. I liked that aspect. I used to see a lot of leadership, and I thought he would run a company one day. He just had, the ability to just, find ways to get his, make whatever he wanted to have happen. And I think that's a good skill. Unfortunately, when he went to school, the first school we picked was this sort of fancy private preschool when he was, almost 3. And the first day they flagged him and asked us to stay or come back the next day and have a meeting. And he didn't listen. He wouldn't do what he was supposed to, and they wanted him screened, by a pediatric neuropsychologist, which we knew he was hard and he was smart, but that was sort of eye-opening. And this neuropsychologist observed him, and she indicated right away that he would have trouble in any sort of public school setting. And our town had a preschool for special needs kids, which this is all of a sudden we went from thinking this kid was this boy genius and all to he's going to have to go to a special needs school, which was tough as a dad, I think, to take. But at that point we were trusting the experts, and we put him in this special preschool, which was a mix of typically developing kids and kids that had issues. And even there he wasn't a great fit because the kids that were there were usually there because they were developmentally delayed in some way. They hadn't really progressed, and they were using the typically developing kids as a model, to say, watch these other kids. Well, Ryan didn't listen to anybody, and he just did his own thing. And so he went there for a couple of years, and that became a problem. And then the neuropsychologist recommended at that point that he go to a therapeutic private preschool. And we toured this place, and it had all the things you might like if your kid was having trouble. It was small classes and individual education plans, and they would preview things and scripted things, and that part was good. The one thing that we missed, and we shouldn't have missed because we're educated people, was that they were allowed to hold the kids. And I use the word hold because that's the word they used. And they described it as a hug when a kid would get dysregulated. Well, I'll fast forward the story because I've gone too long, but Ryan ended up being restrained multiple times a day on the floor. And any time he acted up, they used restraint not just as a last resort, but prophylactically. They would say, Ryan, you're being, you're not behaving. You're going to sit for timeout. He wouldn't sit for timeout. Boom, he's on the floor. They trained us in how to do it at home and convinced us to hire a special needs nanny who was trained in this art of war, as I call it, this art of restraint was the, and I, as a dad and as a male, particularly when I was asked to do it at home, that was when I realized that things had kind of gone off the rails because I would get in these battles with him, and he was now 4 or 5 years old. And when you're in a physical confrontation, even with your own child, like you want to win that confrontation. Like it's stay still, just stay. And I would leave that sweating, and he was upset, and I couldn't even remember why we started in the beginning. And I'd walk away and think, what did that accomplish? Like, how is he supposed to behave better the next time? So my wife and I start questioning this school. We end up in this long, protracted battle with the school. And that just led into this long journey where we're fighting to get him back into public school, ironically. Originally we were excited. We got these, hey, you're going to get to go to this private school. It's $120,000 a year with busing, and we're going to pay for everything. And our town was just very willing to push him out of the system. Now I'm saying to them, take him back. It won't cost you a penny. And they're saying, no, we can't. If you look at his record, he's being restrained multiple times a day. He has a one-to-one aid. So, the last piece I'll say is around the time he was 7 years old, our home life was a disaster. At this point, he has a younger sister. We stopped restraining him at home, but he's one of these kids that was just so combustible, and at any moment he could unravel. And he was so wound up, I think, from his experience at school and expecting to be manhandled at any moment that he would sense if he did something wrong, and he would either flee or he would initiate conflict right away. And our house was just this disaster. So I would just take him anywhere. I used to take him to Home Depot all the time because it was this big place we could just wander around and he could touch everything. And we'd spend hours in there. And one day he was having a battle with his sister, and it was winter. And I couldn't do Home Depot again. I just couldn't do it. And I threw him in the car, and there's a little ski hill near our house that's about 45 minutes away. I hadn't skied in 25 years. I skied a couple times as a kid. That was it. I just threw him in the car. I don't even know why. It's divine providence. I don't know. I mean, for something told me to go to the ski hill that day. And we get out of the car. I didn't even tell him where we were going. And he's asking, what are we doing here? And I didn't even think we'd get through the rental process, so I didn't want to build it up. And somehow we make it through. And I put him on the magic carpet as like an airport people mover that goes up the little hill. And he's in between my legs, and we get to the top of the hill, and finally I got to tell him something. So I said, I started explaining how to ski and how to turn, and I don't even know what I'm talking about because I hadn't skied, and I'm like turning like a bike, which is totally wrong. And he just looks at me and he shoots down to the bottom of the hill and he banks this turn back into the line. And I just was like, wow, I don't know how he knew how to do that. And I stumbled down, and we had this pretty good day. I'll end with this. I left that experience that day. It wasn't perfect, but it was the first time we had done anything where, it felt like we were normal father and son for that moment. We didn't have it wasn't I didn't have to restrain him or timeouts or any of the stuff we were doing at home. It was just a kid who liked to take risks and liked, to get to the top and get to the bottom. And we ended up taking up the chairlift up, and I went back the next day, and then we started skiing all around New England. And I mean, I was terrible. I couldn't ski at all. And he got really good really fast. But we ended up going on this journey that led, fast forward 10 years, all over the country, all over the world. We ended up in Antarctica a couple times. And he's become this really well-known backcountry, skier. And I've become this dad who goes along for the ride. So long answer to a short question, but we can go from there.
So how old is Ryan now?
Ryan's 23 right now.
23.
Yep.
And I'm getting a little choked up because listening to you describe your experiences and Ryan's experiences through that whole deal. It sounds like you're a great dad, and you have a great love for your children. And it sounds like you had a great relationship with Ryan before he went to school, before he started preschool. Did you find that your relationship was a little bit strained after he went to the restraint school?
Absolutely, because once we got trained with how to restrain him, and we started to do it. We didn't do it. We did it for a couple years at home, but we did it very infrequently. But he would look at me after, and it was almost like, "You too, Dad. Like you're gonna do this too." And I thought you were the one I could trust, and I'm gonna get choked up. And I would leave that thinking, I'm supposed to be on his side. And what am I gaining by this? It's I think you grow up in an era. I mean, my dad never hit me, and I think there were parents. I mean, I remember that generation. I mean, there
Oh,
were.
my parents beat the shit out of me. So
Right, right, and I remember the psychologist, I remember she was the child psychologist saying, she said the problem with parents that hit their kids is they don't do it consistently. If they did it consistently, the kids would be okay. It's just they don't know when it's coming, and sometimes they get hit and sometimes they don't. And I remember thinking that's the craziest thing I ever heard. But it does make sense in a way, and I think that's how we were using restraint at home. At school, they used it somewhat consistently. At home, it really depended on my own level of frustration and where my fuse was, right? If it
Yeah.
was just at the end and he just, especially if now he has a younger sister, and if he did something that she came up crying and I assumed he was at fault, like that would be the times I would maybe use it. Or if he was just being so dangerous in the house, and that's when. But I just felt like I was being disloyal to him. And then I learned, when I stopped doing it, my natural inclination in any situation is to use humor, right? I'm funny. And I would start using humor to diffuse them and just to try to say something ridiculous. And I noticed he would just de-escalate a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. And I
Classic
found that like
redirection.
so much more effective. And then I'd say to the school, why don't you just be creative? Like when you see him acting up, just take him for a walk outside, or he loves the outside, or let him climb a tree. And they just look at me like I was crazy. And then that's when I realized, and my wife finally got on board and said, you know, we grew up in this area, right? We live in Boston, this Harvard and all these great hospitals, and we saw all these doctors with, the degrees are hanging on the wall, and you're supposed to, sit up straight. And I just say we know him better than they do. Like they have this appointment, they meet with us for 10 minutes, and then we walk out the door, and then the next kid walks in, and they're not laying awake at night thinking about. I mean, it's a job, right? It's not that to slam the profession, but at the end of the day, it's a career. This is our kid. Like every do and feel, we know what's right and what's wrong, and it took a while. It took a long time, I think, for me to get there. Took longer to get my wife there, and then I think we never got the schools there, frankly. We finally found his last therapist, and it's in the book. I had to change everybody's name, and I wish I had used his real name because he was the first therapist that when we met him. Ryan, at this point, was a teenager, and at this point Ryan was on two antipsychotics and a SSRI, so he's on three meds. He's all bloated from the medicine. And he just looked at us and he's like, "Why is Ryan bipolar?" And we're like, "No, I don't think so. He's never been diagnosed." And you asked me about his diagnosis before. His original diagnosis, um, really was somewhat irrelevant. I mean, it was if you look at these back then the spectrum, you're either screened in for autism or you weren't.
Yeah.
So he was really never diagnosed with anything that we could hang our hats on. So he was never. We had toyed with bipolar a little bit because that comes up a lot. It came up a lot in that era, but we were medicating him as if he was a bipolar.
Yeah,
Patient.
children are way too over medicated these
Mhm.
days, in my opinion. And I did a little bit of study, and it's my middle son. He's 15 now. He was diagnosed with ADHD, and we had some behavioral issues a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
and they wanted to put him on an SSRI. And
Yeah.
there is no safe SSRIs for children.
Okay. Mhm.
There is one that's been proven to be safe, and that's Prozac, and that's
Yeah.
not for children.
Yeah.
And I just the over medicating of children comes from, I think, not just lazy people, but like you
Yeah.
said, it's a job, it's a career. These people are walking, they're seeing 20 to 30 children a day,
Yeah.
and they have to remember each child's quirks. They have to remember each child's name is even difficult. And when we take our kids to our pediatrician, and now my kids have unique names, so they're pretty easy to remember, I would think. But our pediatrician, slowly over time, we lost that close relationship that we had with him, and he doesn't remember much about our children. And so he has to look at his files to, okay, well, he had this issue, and we went and solved this issue. And after dealing with doctors and children, I am so over medications, man.
Yeah, no,
I
that was
am.
our experience too. I mean, that's why I almost hesitated to say that Ryan's diagnosis is pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. And the reason I hesitate is because it's the bucket they use. Like, there's so many kids that get lumped into that, and then I always worry that someone will say, "Oh, well, I'll do what Rob did because my kid has PDD." And well, Ryan probably didn't have anything. I think they attached that label so he could get services, and we allowed that to happen because we wanted the services. then to try to unwind that label, I think that's part of the problem. When we were marketing the book, I mean, even the publisher, they would love to slap, autistic kid skis, in Antarctica, because it's for marketing, it sounds great. But I always tried to dial that back, and I really pulled from the book any mentions of that, because at the end of the day, he's a little quirky, he's different, but who isn't? I
But
mean,
he's Ryan. That's the thing. He's Ryan.
exactly, exactly. He
Yeah.
certainly
I've
didn't need all of the medicines he was on, and it was especially at the ages he was on them, and it just it happens so easily and a little at a time. The first medicine you're going to face when you have a kid who's AD, and Ryan probably has a little a touch or a lot of ADHD, but when they the the Ritalin is the first thing they try to give you, right? Which is meth essentially, and most kids will present better, I think, when they get it initially, so the parents keep them on it. It's short acting, it gets out of your system,
and then
it's
you have to keep changing it.
and Ryan was one of those kids who it was like cocaine. Like it was like he went nuts when he was on it. So we lasted about a day on that. When that fails, then the next category really is the SSRIs. That's really all they can go to. And then when those really, they're not like you said, they're not really meant for kids. Then you end up in the antipsychotic category. And those are real. That's when this last therapist got involved. He was the first therapist who right away started to look at the physical, the side effects from these things are not just, hey, you get a headache. We're talking about like liver damage, kidney damage, 25 pounds of weight gain, cholesterol off the charts. And he said to us bluntly, he said, you have to ask yourself as a parent, does Ryan need this medication to live today? Because he's going to die from it ultimately. This medicine ultimately will kill him. But if it's the only thing that's keeping him from jumping off a building, then you give him the medicine, right? You have to. But I couldn't make that case. He was not in the, at that point. He didn't need, and so we start pulling them back one by one. And I don't see any change in him. No, and I knew there would be any change in him because I would see him skiing. I knew when I would spend not just time with him, the act of skiing, but skiing itself. We had to drive places, we had to fly places, we had to deal with airports. You spent a lot of time on chairlifts, you're waiting, all these things that were supposed to be triggers for him that he couldn't do. I would see him do because it was an activity he wanted at the end of the day. He wanted to get up to the top of the hill. And so I knew when the medicines got peeled back, he was going to be the same kid. And I was lucky that I was proven right. It was a risk. I mean, there was that moment in time when I remember thinking, like, if he does jump off a building, it's going to be on me. Like but I don't know. I was sure I was right, and luckily I
Yeah.
was.
Yeah, it sounds like we've got a lot in common because I've had multiple issues. So I've got four kids total. And my oldest child, I didn't have much to do with her raising, but my oldest son, I have three boys. My oldest son, man, when he was younger, he had some behavioral issues, and his mom and I weren't together, and we lived 2 hours apart. So he didn't have much of a father influence in his life when he was younger. And my ex-wife would call me on the phone, and she'd be like, "Hey, I need you to talk to your kid. He's being bad, and this, that, and the other thing." And the things that they were describing to me that he was doing didn't seem to be all that bad to me. His behavior didn't seem to be all that bad to me. What he was missing was parenting. And they loaded him up on so many medications. Man, I'm sitting here watching my 12-year-old kid at 8 o'clock at night, just nodding out because he's over medicated.
Yeah.
We wake him up in the morning. We had to give him a handful of pills to get him going to school. So he had some pills in the morning to bring him up, and he had a pill at night to bring him down. And it was so, he was over medicated, and I could tell. And when he was 13, he came to live with me. And that's when his life changed. It almost overnight. His life totally just, he's like, I get it. I understand why you wanted me here. And I'm taking him to doctors. We had at one time, I think we were doing 4 to 5 appointments per week. And this is for a child who was only diagnosed with like bipolar and ADHD. He didn't have any autism diagnosis or anything like that. And he had behavioral issues because he wasn't receiving enough parenting at home, enough parent support at school. And when he came to live with me, I became a stay-at-home dad. I stayed home with him. I had to run do these appointments and stuff, and it just seemed like the I just started taking away the pills one at a time, one at a time, and by the time a year he was here a year, and he didn't have any medications. He was going to school. He was behaving himself. I mean, we had behavioral issues out of him, but it wasn't anything out of the normal for, out of the ordinary for a child of his age, a boy. And I'm finding that with with all of my boys that they go to school, and if they can't sit still while they're in class, they're labeled for life. And it hurts my heart because I went through that when
Yeah.
I was younger. I
Yep.
wasn't ever diagnosed with anything, but I had struggles paying attention. I had struggles sitting in class. And now that I'm older, I look back and I'm like, man, it just, school was not built for me. I was not built for school. And there's lots of people out there that are like that. And then I started digging into what school was and why we do school. And if you didn't know, the public school, the public education system here in the United States was designed to churn out workers,
Yep. For sure.
factory workers and secretaries and people that can just sit and drone on needlessly and do their jobs.
Yep.
And for me, I don't really give a shit about all that. You know, I
Yep.
want my kids to be happy, healthy, and ultimately, I want them to be able to survive without me. I
Right.
want them to be able to live. If I die tomorrow, I want them to be okay.
Yeah.
And so I started parenting with that mindset. I don't really give a shit what they do as long as they're productive when they're older. I don't care. You know,
No.
as long as they're happy and healthy, let's go. Let's roll with it. And so in 2019, my wife came to, I know it's 2018. My wife came to me and she says, I'm pregnant, you know, and I'm 35 years old, you know, at the time, or 34. And I'm like, holy shit, what are we going to do? You know, and we'd already had 3 kids at this time. And I was struggling being a dad. And she came to me and she's like, I'm pregnant. And what are we going to do? So we figured it out. And, we, you know, a couple years went by and we started noticing our son was different. His name is Rocket, and he's got level 2 autism. He's been diagnosed with level 2 autism. And for us, it wasn't a shock. It wasn't, it was just something, okay, this is what we're doing now. And I've heard from a lot of parents, just on this podcast, I've interacted with a lot of parents who didn't see it that way. They took their diagnosis as like almost like a death sentence,
Mm.
or like, oh, okay, our lives are changed forever, doom and gloom. We just weren't like that. And the only thing I can attribute it to is I think I'm a little autistic myself. So,
Yep. Me too.
um, and so I, I took that in stride, and we were like, okay, where do we go from here? And our biggest issue was finding resources that were appropriate for our son. There's a million resources out there for autism, for people with ADHD, for people with all kinds of attention disorders, but those programs were not appropriate for our son. And like you said, like if I had to watch somebody restrain my kid, I'd freak out. I would get physical back. And I would go pop a bear and I'd be like, look, you don't touch my kid. You can
Exactly.
do what you want with your kids, but don't touch mine.
Right. Right.
And I could just imagine listening to you talk about that in itself, and having to restrain your child because someone told you that this is the way to get them to act correctly. And that after a few times of doing that, and you get that look from your boy, and you're like, this ain't right. I can't keep doing this. This is torture. And not only is it torture for you, but it's torture for him. And you can see that. And so with us, we started out on our journey just doing some research. We found some research on behavioral modifications and stuff like that. And like you, I spent, the first couple of years with him. And before we shipped him off to school, I didn't want anybody changing him. I loved his personality. I he's an amazing kid. I didn't want anybody changing him. And so we went into every treatment and every doctor's appointment. Like, look, if this is going to change him, I don't want to do this. And we go into IEP meetings and he's in public school. We go into IEP meetings, and that's the first thing that I say. Like, look, I don't really care how your agenda advances as long as we get him through school with C's. I don't care. I
Yep.
don't just don't care. And I just don't want him to be changed. Now he is level two autism. It's kind of difficult for me to explain because my child doesn't have a lot of the same struggles that a lot of other children do. And I consider us as parents, I consider us lucky that we don't have to deal with. Our son was never nonverbal. He was a little delayed with his verbal, but he was never nonverbal. And I struggle sometimes with, because he has that diagnosis, but he doesn't appear, he doesn't wear his diagnosis on his sleeve. If you just met him, you wouldn't know. He can carry on a conversation like an average 5-year-old child. You just have to watch his behaviors and his mannerisms, and in order to be able to catch that, or spend a little bit more time with him. So, with public school, really the only issues that we've had in public school is safety. They will let him walk wherever he wants to go, and I had to let them know, like, listen, you may not be able to tell, but he has autism, and he's never just outright walked away from us. He's never eloped, but I don't want him to be able to if you're not paying attention.
Right.
And so that was a little bit of a struggle. And for us, finding resources to facilitate um, his learning and advancement, it was difficult for us to find appropriate resources. Was it difficult for you to find appropriate resources, especially after the restraint and all that? How did you find resources where you live?
So, I mean, we had to battle with each progressive school. They would give us a small victory. They would let us leave the school we didn't want to be at, but they wouldn't let him go back to public. So we went to a second therapeutic school that restrained less, that was a little better, but still at the heart of it was this ABA trained, sort of restraint was on the table. I mean, it was how those, and a lot of the kids that we saw in the system around Boston, they weren't really even on the spectrum. These were kids that just grew up in terrible situations that, had been abused sexually, physically, neglected, and as a result, they had all these issues and they just couldn't be in regular public schools. So they get dumped into these therapeutic schools. So now you've got a bunch of these kids that are really combustible and they're just, they're, for a good reason. And, Ryan was there and it was like, this isn't a good fit either, but he was
Yeah, it's almost a
managing.
dangerous situation for Ryan.
100%, and friends were so hard to come by because, he'd make a friend at school, but most of the kids were in some kind of foster care situation where they weren't allowed to go anywhere or they couldn't, without, 3 levels of, approval from the state to have a, play date. And it was, so we kept winning these. And then the third school was slightly better, but not great. So it took until junior year of high school. Now I pulled him out when he was in kindergarten. It took the junior year of high school to get him back into public school. And they thought he was going to last a day. They put him on a 45-day evaluation. And I finally said, he's gonna be the best kid here because finally he's gonna be a place where he knows they cannot touch him. This will be the first place he's been at in 12 years or 10 years that they can't touch him. And he was fine. By then, now you're talking about a 16-year-old. So you're gonna find with your son, you know, the social stuff is now, very much on the table. Ryan was, he was getting his license at that point. Girls were very much in the picture, and he was. he was very bright, and he could look at a ski mountain, and he's had this like encyclopedic, ability to map things, and he'd see things in nature that nobody else would see. And, he'd pull out a bird from, 1,000 feet away. And I'm like, God, how do you even see that? What are you talking about? But the nuance, I always worried about, the sarcasm, the social stuff, boys, the testing, I just didn't know how that was going to go. And that was my biggest fear, was that, at that point the stakes are higher. You're in a vehicle, your kids are drinking, there's drugs, whatever. And I knew he wouldn't fall for peer pressure, but there's just going to be other stuff, right? And so that was hard. That was hard because school, I think, up until that point was so regimented and limited, and he just didn't get a lot of those normal, sort of stuff that we would have had along the way, that, you kind of ready yourself, for college. And Ryan, the funny part about the education system is Ryan, I never thought he would go to college, but the further up you go, your son's going to find something he loves. You don't even know what it is yet. He's going to pick something, and it's all he's going to want to do. And ultimately, there could be a college program for that where he loves to go to school every day. Right now, he's in public school where he's lumped in with 35 kids, and they're throwing, history, math, music, whatever at him. And he's probably thinking, I hate, when my son's like, if he's like yours, if he likes something, he's the best kid in the class. If he doesn't like it, he's not going to do it. There's nothing you can do to make him do it. And so that's a terrible fit for a public school because they need everyone to do it. And
So
that's, I don't know if you're
I've
experiencing that.
actually I've actually got one kid like that, but my youngest isn't like that. He's pretty good no matter where he's at.
That's
And
great.
we got lucky on that part because boy, is he an asshole at home. It's
Yeah, that happens a
so
lot.
and man, he's an amazing kid though.
Yeah.
And I just I love him and like okay, for an example, last night he was just a holy terror last night. And keep in mind he is 5, so it's what 5-year-old isn't a terror sometimes. He was just being a pain in the ass, and I there's not much that I could have done to stop him from being that way except for hurting his feelings.
Right.
And I didn't want to do that because then when you when you do discipline the wrong way, with especially with our son Rocket, when you do discipline the wrong way or even send mixed signals, it confuses the hell out of them. They don't know it. Even with consistency on our end, if you don't explain why you're doing something, he won't understand, and he will continue the behavior just because he doesn't understand that that's wrong.
Yep. Yep.
And if he, like I said, he is level 2 autistic. Um, and I don't even know what level 2 means, to be honest with you.
Right.
It's he understands quite a bit more than what we give him credit for, but it's those times where he doesn't understand and we don't care.
Mm.
It's
Mm.
like, and I've used restraining techniques that I've come up with on my own, just holding him while he's frustrated and explaining to him it's okay, I love you, calm down, breathe, and we get through it. But
Mm.
at the end of the day, man, I just sometimes I'm just lucky to get him to go to sleep. So
Yeah.
we let him go as far and as much as we can without losing our minds.
Yeah.
And that's in my mind, that's the best way for him to learn, is to push those boundaries and find out what he can and what he can't get away with. And it for us, he's pretty good, pretty well behaved, no matter the situation, no matter the setting, as long as mom and dad aren't around. If
Okay.
mom and dad are around, we're his comfort. And so he really behaves like a wild child when we're around because he's allowed to
He's
be.
allowed to. Yeah.
Because when we're here at home, like, and keep in mind he's 5, he'll climb on top of the TV stand. I've got some 4 foot tall speakers. He'll climb on top of those and jump off onto the furniture. We allow that
Yeah.
because we we figured out early on that he was
Mm.
going to do these things whether we liked it or not.
Yeah.
And so we just taught him how to do it safely. We taught him how to fall. We taught him how to jump. And now he uses my house as a jungle gym,
Yep.
but he's not like that everywhere else. So
Yeah.
he comes home in his comfort zone. He wilds out, boy. He stems. Uh, they call it stemming when he does a particular behavior to self-stimulate. He will scream at the top of his lungs. He'll bang his hands together, stomp his feet, and he's having fun while he's doing it. You can tell he's not hurting himself. He's not hurting anybody else. He may be annoying people, but we don't care about that.
Yeah.
And so when he's home, he's in his comfort zone. He's allowed to do wild and crazy shit. And when he's at school, he really behaves himself and he's really into learning. I haven't come across, and I'm sure we will, I haven't come across yet an issue with him where he just would not participate. We've not had that issue with him. But we have that issue every day with our 15-year-old. And he's not been diagnosed with autism. He's just got a heavy dose of that ADHD that everybody wants to, you can't sit still, you've got ADHD. So we have that issue particularly a lot with him. If he's not interested, he just will not do it.
Hmm.
Even here at home, if we want him to do some chores, if he's not interested, he'll screw it up on purpose just so we don't ask him to do it again.
Smart.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and as a matter of fact, it's learned behavior. He probably learned it from me.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So
My guess with
it's
Rocket is trying so hard to keep it together at school. Like it's,
yes, and it's got to be exhausting.
peer pressure exists even at that age. Like he sees the other kids, right? So he's working really hard all day long, and then he comes home and it just has to come out, right? I mean, it's just there has to be an outlet for him, and you're the outlet, and that's if you know that going in, I think it's a little easier to deal with. It's not that it's he's not targeting you. He's like you said, you're the sort of scaffolding where he can do all this in a safe place, and I think you're on the right track. I think definitely with the house as a jungle gym, he's gonna do it anyway. It's Ryan, we had the state here because he jumped out of like my office is on the second floor of my his sister's window. He jumped out of his sister's window when he was little. But he had jumped off the back deck and measured it, and that was like 12 feet. And then he measured the window, and the window was like 15 feet. And he's like, well, if I did that, I can do that. So I think it wasn't, and I tried to explain that to, that this kid's it's a science experiment. Like he's testing a hypothesis. Like this isn't, he didn't just jump out of a window for the sake of jumping out of a window. And
I
so
do
it's
worry
really
about
hard.
that sometimes.
We just don't get it. These kids
One
are,
time when he was 2, I pulled his arm out of socket on accident. I gave him nursemaid's elbow. We were out on a skating rink, um, ice skating rink, for a birthday party, and I was walking out there with my shoes. He had his shoes on, and he went to fall. And instead of letting go, I held onto his arm and tried to hold him up, and that yanked his elbow out of socket. And he was 2, and I was freaked out. I was like,
yeah.
because I know how people are in the city that I live
Right.
in. I live near
Oh, God.
Kansas City,
Yeah.
and I'm like, I told my wife, I was like, you go ahead and take him to the hospital, give him the truth, tell him what happened, but I'm going to stay here.
Yeah.
And if anybody comes for me, let me know so I can get a head start. so,
It is true.
so I do worry
'Cause
about
they
that
just keep asking
sometimes.
you the question, like, how did that happen? How did that happen? How did that happen? Like,
No, actually, they told us it was a pretty common injury,
oh, I
and
bet. Wait, skating? Yeah, it probably is.
yeah, yeah, they didn't think twice. They fixed him
Yeah.
right up and brought him home. But I do worry about that sometimes
Yeah.
because of past experiences, and I just know how freaked out people get with children. I understand. If I saw a kid with a limping around like this, and he had a dad that looked like me, I'd be like, "Did you hit him?"
Right.
And
Right.
so I mean, I get it. I get it. I just don't want it to happen to me.
No, of course. No, it's complicated. And they're gonna be, you have multiple kids, so you're gonna get tested multiple times. And sometimes, I'll talk about my daughter for a second. The parenting experience with her was here's a kid who's the good kid, right? Who doesn't get in trouble, who just sits there and watches TV or plays with puzzles or colors or, when she was little. And we in a lot of ways ignored her for so long because he took all of our energy and she just was was just sitting there. And, it came out years later. I think that she started to act out to try to get our attention. And why wouldn't she? Because we hadn't given her enough. And it's
And she knew from watching what works,
absolutely. And
how
so,
to get mom and dad's attention. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, sometimes you miss that along the way because you get so wrapped up and you have four. So, I mean, we only have two. So I can imagine. And then you have them at various ages too, I think. But I
Yeah,
think in a lot of ways,
absolutely.
families with multiple kids, it's very rare around here to have a family with three or four, but, I think the kids learn to fend for themselves a little more and the parents aren't always the solver of every problem. And I think it's probably better for them in the long run for sure. So
Absolutely. Man, this conversation's gone really well because you and I we're on the
yeah,
same
isn't that
page here.
crazy? That
So I find often that later on in life, if they've got the proper coping skills from and each kid is different, and you're going to find that you can't treat your oldest son like your daughter, and you can't treat your daughter like your son. And sometimes with four children, it's difficult to understand or know when to be the right dad with the right hat on
mm,
in the moment. It's like I've talked to people before. It's like a hat switch. Like a forward facing hat dad is business. We'll get this stuff done. We'll take care of this. Backwards cap dad is the fun dad. And if running around the logo back there backwards hat, it's because I've always got a hat on and it's always backwards. If I flip that bitch around, you look out because I mean
right.
business.
It's time. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I equate it to that. You really have to be cognizant of their own personal issues, each child. And I've struggled with that with my 15-year-old son. He gets ignored a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And mainly because he likes to be alone. We allow him to be alone. And because he's out of sight, out of mind, he doesn't cause any problems. That in itself is causing problems. He's turning into a kind of a weird kid because he doesn't have that social aspect of being around mom and dad,
Yeah.
being able to come in and ask questions, just being able to be a general annoyance,
Yeah.
and I think there is something to that, that man, with children with, and I don't want to say children with special needs because it's really almost all children who demand attention. If you've got one child that demands more attention than the other children, those other children are going to miss out
Yeah.
on a lot. And we as parents have to be cognizant of that, and really, if not pay attention more, compensate. And
Yeah.
I compensate by spoiling the shit out of my 15-year-old. And we took him to Universal Studios for his birthday, and we didn't do that for any of the other kids.
Right.
On vacations, he gets his own day.
Yeah.
Like we
Right.
call it Sully's Day.
Yeah.
And I've explained it to all the children, like, and so we don't have to go through that. Well, why does he get his own day? So we don't have to go through that. I explain it to him beforehand. Like, look, he's the middle child. He's got middle child syndrome. He gets ignored a lot.
Right.
And so this is essentially us trying to buy his love.
Right.
And I explain it to him like that. And I think they understand.
Yeah. At least you're honest
And
about it, right? You're upfront and honest.
exactly,
We do
exactly.
respect
And
that.
I
Yeah.
find I find honest parenting is really, it's best for me, but I think a lot of parents, if they really understood, like kids understand more than what we give them credit for. Even the normies, you
Yeah.
know, when you're in a situation and it's a bad situation, let's just say financially, you don't have enough money to pay the bills and get food at the same time. That happens to me sometimes. The kids can tell that they're
Yeah.
stressed,
Definitely.
you know, and if you lie to them, you're not doing them any favors later on down the road when they run into the same issue. If they run into the same issue where they have to pick a bill or food, what are they going to do? What
Right.
what did and if you are honest with them about what's going on, when it's happening,
Yeah.
you can alleviate and you don't have to give them financials. You don't have to tell them like, oh, I owe a hundred
Right.
thousand dollars on this
Right.
house. You don't have to do all
Details,
that.
right. Yeah.
You just be like, kid, I'm broke,
Yeah.
and
Right.
explain it to them. People are broke sometimes.
Right.
And I think if more people were honest with their children, it would get them a lot farther in the personal relationship aspect
Yeah.
of it.
No.
You'll be just fine as a parent if you lie to your kids all the time,
Right.
but they will not have the benefit of being able to see that struggle
Yeah.
and know how to fix it or know how to cope, essentially. Like if they watch mom and dad struggling
Yeah.
and mom and dad are like, okay, this is what's happening, this is why we're doing this. If we're just honest, and you got to take that pride and just throw it out the window,
Right.
don't be too proud to explain to your kids what's happening because they're going to
Yeah.
learn from it.
Yeah. No, I think if you try to hide it, they'll pick up pieces of it, and in their mind they make it worse. If you're, whispering about the cost of something, they hear that little bit and piece, and they turn that into we are broke, and it's like no, everything's fine. We're pissed about the, the cost of repairing the car or something. It's a smaller thing than you made it into a big thing. Don't worry about it. And then the other thing you said I thought was interesting was, when you say that your son's alone, I know this from my daughter, they're never alone because they have this thing in their hand that's firing, information and God knows what at them 24 hours a day. And when we were alone, we were alone. Maybe we were alone sitting in front of the television and they used to tell us we were going to be dumb because of it. But, we were watching one thing at a time, and it was pretty innocuous what we were watching. What they have in their hands and what they see is, this doom all the time and this, and this
Yeah,
algorithm that's feeding whatever, whatever fear and anxiety they might have, or, it's really terrifying, I think, as a parent, especially of a teen boy that age. Or, my
that could
daughter's
be.
now older, but when she was a teenager in particular, that was God knows what she was looking at. You have no idea.
Yeah, yeah. I actually I've ran. I've it's it's funny that you talk about that because I have those issues. I've three boys. My two oldest boys have had issues with electronics and like looking up unsafe things, um, pornography,
Of course.
um, talking to strangers and stuff. Like we've
Yep.
had all those issues, and because of that, we've had to limit
Good.
screen time. We've had to limit electronics. My son, my 15-year-old son, we actually recently got him a cell phone, but it's one of those kid safe phones.
Nice.
And
Yeah.
I don't even like him to have that.
Yeah.
And the only reason he has it is, to be honest with you, I don't, he's, he doesn't pay attention a whole lot. So when he's at school, we have to pick him up and we're in a hurry. He doesn't know, so he takes his time getting to the
Yeah.
car. Sometimes he comes out the wrong exit. So we would prefer him to have a cell phone at school so we can get a hold of him. Hey, this is where we're at because we've got a 5-year-old. We can't run around and do
Yeah.
all sorts of things. But for us, I do think that these screens cause a huge issue, especially with attention
Yeah.
deficit with children, all children. I don't think it's healthy. Like you were talking about how they said TV would make us dumb, and I think that's actually pretty true.
Right.
Um,
Exactly. Depends what
I
you're
sit
watching,
in
but
front
yeah.
of
Yeah.
I sit in front of my TV, and it's just mindless shit that
Yeah.
comes
I
out of
know.
there.
Right. No,
And
no, it was commercial driven. It was a different time, right?
exactly,
But it was, you had to sit for 30 minutes or an hour and the commercials in between. And, it was, this steady stream, but it was slow. I mean, the stuff
yeah, it
they see
wasn't
stuff
instant
in three
gratification. Like,
second bits. And it's like, and all the while their mind is just reacting to it. And it's really, I think it'll be interesting to see what this generation, what they become and what they're like, because They've had a weird existence. The iPhone generation in particular, the kids that were born, my kids were right around there and slightly into that. But they had phones in their hand from probably 12 years old on. So and it could be a source of good. I mean, Ryan was a kid who school was such a bad experience for him, but he loved information. So all of a sudden he has this thing in his hand where he's watching YouTube videos about everything and finding out, anything he knows more about science and nature than anybody. He could have a
Yeah.
PhD, but he literally got it all from the internet by just his own research. That's a great thing. It's an awesome tool, but I worry, my daughter and it's, TikTok and some of these other apps that are just, it's,
If they're social,
yeah,
if they're social, I wouldn't worry too much.
right.
It's the being alone and having all that information right in front of it makes you a weird person
Yeah,
for a lack of a better
I know.
term.
Yeah,
But we as adults, you and I could go to a restaurant and order food like it's no problem. These children these days have so many screens in front of them. They'll interact with each other, but they'll do it through a screen.
mhm,
So what we like to do is when we take our kids out to eat or when we're doing anything, we make our children talk to everybody. When they're ordering their food, we make them order their own food. That way they know how to do that. And some like every every restaurant, Taco Bell has an app. McDonald's has an
right.
app. You don't even have to
You
talk to
talk to
them.
anybody. Yeah, I know.
And that I think is going to cause
I think so. Yeah,
a lot of issues for Generation Z and Generation Y.
yeah, yeah,
But
no,
I don't it they may figure out a way to work around it. But I think if your kids are social, don't worry
right.
about the screen time as much.
Yeah,
But if they're what we would call, quote unquote weird kids, get them out there and socialize with people. Just
yeah,
make them talk to each other. Set
yeah.
them face to face, make them talk to each other. And that solves a lot of those issues.
Yeah. No, I think we saw that with skiing. Skiing, became this thing, but it wasn't like, I thought it would. I never knew that was going to be our thing. But the aspects I really liked about it was it doesn't lend itself to having a phone in your hand. It's cold. You have gloves on. Your phone's in your pocket. You have a lot of these chairlift conversations. So you meet total strangers. You're gonna talk. You're gonna ride up anywhere between 2 and 10 minutes. And I've had some of the best conversations with just total random people. And it's like, and
Yeah.
I think my son would see that. It's like, geez, dad can talk to anybody. Like, you know how we are, and you're like that too. 2 seconds, you find common ground, and then you're talking about something, and it's a good experience. And I think for kids who can do that, that life is, there's always somebody interesting to meet. I think nature offers a lot of that. I have seen with my son, he's now gone into rock climbing, and I never camped. I never, I never slept outside. I was afraid of bugs. I was not like that. I wasn't that guy, but he is. He lives in a van most times, and he's out there in the world. And I think it is a different experience when you're dealing with people on a face-to-face level. I see his life a lot differently. My daughter is much more traditional, and much of her life revolves around the phone. And she'll have 4 friends over, and I look at them, and they're all sitting on the couch looking at their phones, and it's like, you
And
guys are
oddly enough, they're
21.
talking to
Like,
each
go to a
other.
bar. Go do something. Like, did you want us to drink? I'm like, no, but I'd like you to be around other people and talking. This is making me crazy to look at this. So it's a
Yeah,
different thing.
yeah, exactly. I'm actually an extroverted introvert. It's very weird to explain to people. Like, I love being alone. I except for like here at home, much rather be with my family. But I could live life just me and my family at home
Yeah,
and not have to be around many people. I could do that, but I can also be the life of the party, and I love to be the center of attention. And so I think that's where my kids get that thing. But like you, I could just sit and like going on vacation is awesome because I get to meet a lot of new people. And like going to Universal Studios, like we love going to Universal Studios. And we take our kids and they are forced to interact with people. They have to stand next to them in line for 20 to
Yeah.
30 minutes,
Yep.
and I don't know if, like, I'm sure you've had issues with Ryan and standing in line and how impatient
What?
children can
Yep.
be. And when, like, on the ski ramp, that anticipation's building,
I know.
that
Yeah.
he's going to go down that hill, and
Yep.
it's something that he wants to do. So we love theme parks. We love taking our kids to theme parks. We love roller coasters and stuff like that. And the more they interact with people, and it doesn't have to be people like them, just people. The
Yep.
more they interact with people and they get used to it and they understand, like, hey, when we're out of the house, we're going to have to get jobs. We're going to have to interact with people. We're going to have to interact with each other. And I think we're all going to be just fine.
Yeah.
I
I
think,
hope. Right.
yeah, yeah. Well, with the way politics is kind of going, for the last 10 years or so, it's kind of gotten a little weird, for people our age. But then we've got kids who are more in tune with what each other need,
Mhm.
what each other want. And I think there'll come a time where we don't even have to have a government.
Yeah, no, I have seen that. I have seen them rally around each other. They're when something does happen in their lives, my daughter's friend group in particular, they're pretty good about that. I think in a way they're more public with in some ways to their detriment, their struggles. I think there's a performative nature to it somewhat online.
Oh, yeah.
And but at least they're open about it. Like you don't worry that they're in their room just crying in their pillow and secretly miserable and you missed it all these years. Like they're pretty open and honest with each other, and I think that's probably going to be productive in some ways. But I do worry a little bit that they're learning to grieve publicly or learning to be sad publicly, and our generation, there's some days you just got to go to work, whether you feel good or bad.
Yeah, yeah. I think actually that's actually a good point, that you bring up there. Is we there are days where we're not going to want to get up and
Yeah.
go to work, and it's how we deal with those days. It's how we deal with those issues that really gets us through the day. You could there's lots of ways you can handle it. Like, I'm burnout. I haven't been on vacation in so long. I need a vacation. So I'm really, really burnt out. And I just explained it to my kids, like, my life sucks right now. Your life sucks right now. It'll get better eventually, but right now man, is that we need a vacation. I think I think if we that honesty part, where we're honest with each other, we're honest with the kids, and they're growing up into society and being honest with society, especially about, like, back in the day, you didn't used to the general rule of thumb was, in conversation, don't bring up politics and don't bring up religion. Those are the
Mhm.
two most hot topics that
I
one
know.
could discuss right now. And I think the more people talk about it, the more we understand that this, like, politics right now, all of them are shysters,
Yeah. Yep.
and the
Yep.
entire government is set up and it's rigged against us. I
Yep.
think the more people are paying attention, the more, like, we can tell, like, our politicians are gaslighting us, and I think these kids are picking up on that. I think they're
Yeah.
like, we see you, and this isn't what we want, so you
Right.
better get out of here.
Yeah,
And I
and they're
think I
being
think
fed from an algorithm that's owned by the Chinese government who's telling them how to think. And so they're seeing our politics in a very skewed way, in a very, a way that, kind of tailors their thinking to a result. And then the
I
result
don't know.
really is
I
to make
don't
them
know if
consume
that's
more
gonna.
content.
I don't know if that's an issue, or so. Man, that's a landmine in some circles. Talking about, like, the Chinese algorithm and propaganda. Holy shit! You're talking about TikTok, right?
TikTok, yeah, no, I think TikTok is, listen, businesses use it. Is a lot of, good uses of it. It disseminates information so quickly, but
But
the
he's a
algorithm.
propaganda machine.
The algorithm, it feeds on, whatever you're thinking, it senses, it knows, and it's going to give you more of that. And you go down these rabbit holes. Maybe not even purposeful. Maybe it's not, it's just the way it self-perpetuates you to think a certain way. And these kids that if they're angry about something, they're going to get fed more anger. If they're sad about something, they're going to get fed more sadness. And I think Facebook has become that, and Instagram, a lot of ways are like that. If you look at some of the stuff that pops up in your feed and you're like, well, why is that in there? But
Like
it's
YouTube. YouTube's awful. I
same.
like
Yeah.
that too. Like my YouTube feed is almost entirely right wing propaganda. So it's
Right,
like
right.
Tucker Carlson pops
Yeah.
up on my feed all the time,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
I got nothing against Tucker Carlson, but he's a little too far right for me these days. Liked I liked him before all. Um, so
I'll give you a fun
he
fact. Tucker was in my my college class. I took a
no
lot of
kidding.
classes with Tucker. Tucker, we went to Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, is where Tucker's from. He was in my class. He was a political science major. I was a political science major. So we were in a lot of classes together, but
So
he was,
he recently had on Oliver Stone,
yep.
and I don't like Oliver's. I like okay, so Oliver Stone is a good person. He's got some great movies or whatever, but I think he I think he pays a little bit too much to Russian propaganda and Russian talking points, and I think Tucker Carlson does too.
Yeah.
So I'm a patriot first of all, and I voted for Donald Trump, and I hate the shit that's going on in politics these days. I wish they get it all solved and under control, but it is what it is. I think that Donald Trump was the best of our options. I'm not really I don't really think he was the best man for the job, but he was the best of our options. And so, with that being said, I, with geopolitics, like the Israel Gaza situation, I agree with Trump. I agree with Netanyahu. On the Ukraine Russia front, I'm I stand with Ukraine. I'm not anti-Russian. I am not I'm anti-Russian government. I'm anti-communist. The technically, China doesn't even have a government. The CCP is a party. It's a political party that took over the country. China's government actually resides in Taiwan. But so that's the way I feel. And you watch some of these, like YouTube's algorithm. And so, since I believe that, I'll get right wing talking points, and I'm not a right winger. I'm in the middle, and I have some very complicated views on things because of historical facts, and nuances. I understand there's nuances with everything, but how they politicized Israel and Gaza, that whole thing was fed by algorithms. And the reason why we are still struggling to get hostages back, algorithms did that. It changed the way people think. And the Iranian government had spent millions and millions and millions of dollars fixing that algorithm
Yeah.
to fit their point of view. And then we got kids at college campuses protesting, saying, like gays for Palestine. That's an oxymoron. That doesn't even make sense.
It's Right. Yeah. No, I saw it in my daughter's now 22, and her, so you start following her friends when they're younger, and now they're, in their 20s, and I see the stuff that they post, and I just like hold my head, and it's like, oh, you
You're
just
all a bunch of communists. That's what
have
I
no
think.
idea what you're, what you're propagating, because you don't know enough. And I try to tell my kids, I mean, the silly analogy I use is, you know, Boston, right? Red Sox fan. Before the Red Sox won a World Series, if you were from New York, I didn't like you. Like I couldn't like anyone who was a Yankee fan. And then, but then, in your 20s, you think that way. And then you get older and you're like, there's nothing about that person I like. No, just because they root for this team, there's probably some good qualities there.
I'm a Royals fan and I don't like Yankees fans.
Right, exactly. And so, and then you look on Facebook and it's like, all right, you're Trump or you're not Trump, and one or the other, and then we all have to go our separate ways. And it's like, see
But when you
families
go
splitting over this, and it's like, come on, man. You
when
know,
you go to the grocery store though, Robert, when you go to the grocery store, when you go to the gas station, you can see somebody in a wearing pink hair and with blue polka dots opening the door for someone who has a veteran's hat on. You know that we see that all the time. We are not our governments, and social media is not real life. I I try to or I try to explain that to my older children. Like, listen, this the stuff you're seeing on social media isn't necessarily true to life.
yeah.
Go outside and like Ben Shapiro says, touch some grass.
Yeah,
You
no, it's
know,
true. Yeah. I
I
heard that expression, touch on grass, from my son. My son was the first person I ever heard. He used to say it all the time, and I'd make fun of him. And I was like, "Come on, like, what's that gonna do?" But now I really believe it. I just look at, there's something to be said for getting away from this stuff and just, existing as a person and taking people on face value, and what do you care what their politics are? Does it really matter at the end of the
yeah
day? I mean, how has your life changed? If you think about, like, I don't know, I'm probably older than you, but you know, you know, from Bush to Obama, I mean, to Trump, to Biden, it's with each swing, how did your life change? Like, did you wake up? Did you go to work? Did you feed your kids? Did you try to have some fun? Like, you can say the country changed or things changed or this changed, but like the guttural level, like how did it really change you? And unless
yeah
you let it,
yeah
and if you didn't let it change you, then tomorrow there'll be somebody else, and
exactly.
hopefully they'll keep us safe, keep us alive, keep us healthy. And if they don't, then we have a problem. And I think there were times, recent history with COVID and everything, they probably didn't. And I think that's the most important thing. And you've got to think for yourself, and how, and my this from my son, what you eat, how you sleep, how you exercise, all of that stuff plays more of a role in your happiness level and certainly your long-term health level than anything that some politician does in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, yeah, that's excellent, man. That is really excellent. And you said Ryan spends a lot of time in his van camping and stuff, right?
Mhm.
And I think we could all learn a little bit from
Yeah,
Ryan and
yeah,
go outside and enjoy. Like, man, yeah, just take your cell phone and put it in airplane mode for the day
yeah,
and see how much peace you get.
yeah.
It's amazing to and so that's another thing why you got to caution the kids for the screen time, I think. And you got to if you educate them on what this stuff does,
Mhm.
like we were educated, we know about algorithms. We know that if we push that like button, it's going to show us more of that stuff. We know that if we argue with somebody on a specific topic, the algorithm is going to show us more that pisses us off.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
right.
if we caution our kids against that, I think, man, these kids nowadays are quite a bit smarter than we were. And I think if we just caution them against that
Yeah.
and be like, hey, these are tools for us to use, these are not how we live our life. This is not, this millionaire over here probably isn't even a millionaire. You probably have more money than this person,
Right.
but this is not real
Yeah,
life. If you open up your door, you go outside, you go to the gas station, those are real people.
yeah, yeah, for
And
sure.
I think they'll be okay, man.
Yeah, I think so
I
too. I,
really
I
do.
I think so too. I think you're right. I think there's a lot to like about this generation. I think there's a it's a changing world, and they're gonna have to adjust. I think AI is gonna be a big factor that'll change things, but
Oh yeah.
in some ways it'll be good, and there's some stuff we're gonna have to adjust to, and they'll adjust. I mean, it's at the core we're still people, and I have a lot of hope, as you do, and I've learned a lot, ironically, from my son, and if you want to read his words, the book is called Without Restraint, and it's we wrote separately, so you'll get my perspective and his perspective, and
That's
he's a pretty
that's
pretty
unique.
unique guy. He's also pretty prolific on social media. Ryan Delena, if you look at Ryan, he's makes a lot of YouTube videos about his his adventures out there in the world and living in the van, and he's an
I'm gonna
interesting
have to check
follow.
that. What's his channel name? His YouTube channel?
It's just Ryan, his last name Ryan, and his last name's Delena, Delena.
Okay, and
Um,
we're gonna link that in the description as well
Thank you.
because I'm definitely gonna check that out. And
Yeah.
the book Without Restraint: How
Mhm.
Skiing Saved My Son's Life. How much time do you have right now? Do you got a little bit of time?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so Without Restraint, how did you come up with that name? Is it just your experiences with the schooling and restraining and
Yeah.
then going out on the slopes and finding out that we don't need restraint? Is that what that
Yeah. Yeah. That the name, I mean, that name was like what it's funny, it took a long time. It was hard. I couldn't come up with the right title. And then I don't know, he's kind of landed on that. And I wanted it, to because his experience being restrained and then, the opposite of being restrained and trying to find, words that worked with that. And I land on Without Restraint. And then I Google it and you laugh. There's this whole series of like graphic adult novels called Without Restraint, which are about people being tied up in bondage. And I'm like, oh crap, they're not going to let us use this, because someone else took it. But the publisher just never mentioned it and kind of went with it. And I think, it's such a different genre in the book. It's obviously not the same series of books. So they allowed it to fly through. And I really like the title. I think it works on a lot of levels. And yeah,
it
it's
does work on a lot of levels. Like and the play on words, without restraint, that works as well. But looking at the book without restraint, it almost takes on several different meanings depending on who you are,
yeah.
depending on the reader.
Yeah.
And I love that. I
Yeah. And
absolutely
that
love
that
that.
cover shot is Ryan, skiing in Antarctica. I mean, here's a kid who, we never thought was gonna do anything. And, he and I that was in 2018, we're in Antarctica. And I think more people have walked in space than have skied in Antarctica. And and that journey to get there, like so many things had to happen. And it all, one little ski hill turned to the next and turned to the next, and the next adventure turned to the next. And we met people along the way who encouraged us and that encouraged him, and there we were, and it's somewhat humorous because the fact that I was there was probably as unlikely as him being there. And I write pretty openly and honestly about, backcountry skiing is different. There's no chairlift, there's no helicopter. You put on skins on the bottom of your skis, this material, and you walk up the mountain thousands of feet, one step at a time. And then you take them off and you ski down. And it takes, 5 hours to get up and 5 minutes to get down. I mean, the math is crazy. But people who like backcountry skiing like the going up part as much as they like the going down part. I have yet to embrace that yet. I still think maybe a helicopter would be way more efficient, but I'm learning to like it. So it's living that way. And for him, it was the way he had to live. He had to live, free of the shackles of the expectations and all of the stuff that I foisted on him when he was younger because I wanted him to make more money than I did. And I wanted him to be more successful than I did. And if I went to a good college, I wanted him to go to a great college. And all of that pressure that was more about me than it wasn't about him. And that's, when that changed for him and I just let him be, he became who he should have been from the start, right? Here's this kid who's this as solid an outdoorsman as you'll ever find, and skiing is measured and you can measure it in a number of different ways, but he's able to go places other people aren't able to go. He can ski things other people can't ski. Not to say he did it, just because he wants to see it, explore it, and then he writes about it. He does these, long trail reports, and he maps things for people because if it's safe and he did it, he wants other people to experience it as well. So he's become, well known in that respect, I think, and it's controversial sometimes because there's these old crotchety New Englanders who don't think you should talk about places you ski because you're going to invite the masses, and these are these secret spots that you're not supposed to give up. And if you look at the the latest series of YouTube videos, he's embroiled in this controversy because he mapped this area of Vermont that was, protected by these old timers, and he bent a little bit because he did think maybe they had a couple of points about safety and maybe inviting people in there who weren't ready. And so he dialed it back, and he took a reasoned approach, and he asked me I waited, and I didn't say anything until he came to me for advice. And I said, listen, I think this is a tough one, and I think maybe there's a middle approach we can find, and you're gonna have to find it, but you're gonna have to make that call. So he's he's able to live in a way that, to me, sometimes, he doesn't shower a lot. He doesn't wear deodorant. He never combs his hair. He lives in a way that I can't imagine. He and his girlfriend sometimes share this van space, which is about this big, and somehow make it work. And you know what? But isn't that awesome? Like, to be that free and not care, and not have
I
to have a job because your parents want you to have a job, or go to, law school because your parents think you should go to law school like I did, or, it's kind of nice. I think I always thought that about him even when he was a little kid. I said, he doesn't care what other people think about him. God, wow, that would be so
wish
freeing.
we could all be that free. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And so for me, listening to Ryan's story is more, it's more a story of family triumph. You guys triumphing together. I, and then not only did Ryan thrive when you took him skiing, but you and I'm assuming your wife were like, whew, you
Yeah,
know, I'm getting goosebumps and listening to you talk about Ryan. It's choked me up a couple times during this conversation. It's just the love that you have for your kids, man. I love it, and I've said this a couple times on the podcast. But I love love. For me, there is nothing better than that feeling,
yeah. Thank you.
and watching your kids succeed at something that they love, and you see that smile, you see that. And so what that he doesn't wear deodorant? So what
Yeah.
that he hasn't taken a shower in a couple days? That's not a big deal.
No,
I
no.
could absolutely live the way I could live in a van if it wasn't
Yeah.
for the showering. Like I have to shower
Yeah.
every day. I
I know,
have
right?
to. But I could live in a van. If
Yeah.
we could all be that free and not give a shit what
I know.
anybody else thinks
I
and
know.
do what we want to do. And I think we would all be happier. I think all of us would be free.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and that's an admirable quality that Ryan has. And now you talked about a little bit about he's embroiled in a little bit. I just finished watching Yellowstone, the TV show
Mhm.
Yellowstone.
Yeah. Yeah. I love Yellowstone.
Oh,
Yep.
I love that show,
Yeah.
and so I do understand the other side, and
Yeah.
and without that TV show, I may not have cared,
Right.
but I absolutely understand where they're coming from. And earlier in the conversation, we talked a little bit about AI and Ryan using AI, and we had talked earlier about uh, understanding certain context clues in conversations and sarcasm and stuff like that. I've had a brilliant idea, and I don't know if anybody's working on it or if there's something like this that exists, but I would like to get Rocket, my son, his own personal AI,
Hmm.
his own personal robot. Now, Elon Musk says we'll all have these humanoid robots in our lives in 10 years. But I would like some kind of AI. Have you ever seen the movie Iron Man or The Avengers?
I don't think so. No. I know the
So,
concept though. Like, that's sort of.
so Iron Man has a computer named Jarvis,
Yeah.
and it's essentially an AI. And this AI talks to him like a friend, like a confidant, and ultimately like an employee. And so I wondered if context clues are very, very important for people in general, but people like Ryan, it's especially important that we are able to pick up on those clues. And I'm wondering if there's an AI program out there or will be available in the future that will help be able to discern sarcasm
Yeah.
and help the user understand sarcasm or understand context clues
Yeah.
without that person understanding themselves. Like if Rocket could have an earbud when he's older and
Yeah.
walk down the hallway and somebody says a joke that he doesn't immediately understand, the AI can pick up and be like sarcasm, sarcasm, and then he'll be like, oh, okay, I get it, you
Yeah.
know. And I think those days are coming if they're not already here. And I'd
Yeah.
absolutely love to get Rocket and AI because who would be, and you also mentioned this earlier in the conversation, like who knows our children more than we do,
Yeah. For sure.
and
No.
who knows, ultimately who knows our children more than they do.
Yeah.
And if Rocket had an AI that could learn with him from 5, 6, 7, the AI is going to become him,
Yeah.
and he could have a life coach later on in life that is him. Who
Yeah.
to better be a life coach than yourself?
Yeah, I think your instincts are so right. And I'll give you a simplified example. When Ryan was coming up as a student and younger, he would look at a book and look at all the pages and the words, and it just would overwhelm him, right? It just, I'll never be able to read this 300-page book. And this is back before audiobooks were a thing, but I would go on the internet, and I would find like the classics were on audio, but you had to pay, it was expensive, and it was a weird platform. But if I could find it and he could listen to it, he could, and he never forgets. Like if he could auditorily, if he hears something, it goes in there forever. There's something about reading the words that it didn't, if he could read a short passage, he would get there, like encyclopedic stuff, facts. But like the nuance of a story, I think he would lose somewhat in the pages. Whereas if he heard it, he wouldn't lose it. So I found every book I could find. And then I found I was downloading ones that he wasn't even assigned. Like I knew the ones, all the classics you're gonna have to read. And I'm like, you're gonna have to read this eventually. Let's just listen to it now and you'll have it. You'll be boom, it's done. So I think you're right. I think now fast forward 20 plus years, we're probably at that point where there'll be some kind of filtering, right? Where like this is bullshit or this is the truth or this is the joke, and I
I
think
think
that's
that's actually, I think that part is actually closer than we understand really. Um, Facebook, Meta, they have their own AI. Um, and these are large language models, so they're quite a
Mhm.
bit different than when people think AI. AI is actually a misnomer. We don't have AI. What we have is large language models and machine learning. So they actually have Meta AI and let's see, Twitter has Grok. So they already have those things that can help out contextually. And like with Ryan reading books, they have this, you can feed the AI the book and then say, okay, now summarize.
Mhm.
And it automatically does those things like Cliff's Notes.
Yeah,
And that's an amazing technology. I think that's closer to reality. In all actuality, I don't think the people that own these large language models like Meta and like Twitter or X, I don't think they really understand how powerful they are.
it's
I think
true.
they know how powerful they could be, but I
Yeah,
don't think they've spent billions of dollars on developing this technology.
yeah,
And Meta's AI doesn't even have an app.
yep,
Like it doesn't have its own standalone app.
yep,
If they could just do that, it's going to change the the setup and how it works so much.
yeah,
And it'll be so advantageous for users like me to
yep,
have its own app. And like Meta's AI it actually talks to you. It
yep.
can carry on a conversation with you. I don't know if Grok or ChatGPT can do that yet. I only work with Meta because it's easy for me.
Mm.
And but you can already talk to these AI large language models like they're people and they
Yeah,
understand those contextual clues. And so if you read it if I'm sure they're using the large language models to
Yeah.
monitor social media and be able to suss out bullshit from what's not
Yeah.
bullshit.
Yeah.
And I think those days are already here.
Yeah, no, if you look at our book, I think on Amazon, the Amazon description of the book is clearly AI generated. And tell you what, it's pretty good. Like it's pretty like it must have gotten fed in and it, extrapolates the main points but even to the next level takes, kind of a fact-based thing that happens and then it comes up with a summary and you're like, that's not bad. That's pretty much
Yeah,
on the
you
money.
don't even have to feed it anymore. It can go out like Google's. You remember when Google first came out? It kind of spider webs the
Yep.
internet by itself. I
Yep.
think large language models have the permission to do that already.
Yeah. No, I think there's a case in Massachusetts where a kid got in trouble at school and he was in middle school. And, essentially he used AI as a search tool. He didn't ask it to write his paper, but like, is it any different than typing into the Google search, who was Thomas Jefferson than if you ask AI who was Thomas Jefferson? But they can tell he used AI, but it's like, is it any different, really? It's really
Does
just
it really
skipping.
matter? Yeah,
Yeah.
because he had the information to ask the question to begin with.
Yep.
And then when gave, now I could see a case for making him put it in his own words.
Yep.
So he's not plagiarizing the AI. I could
Yep.
see a
Definitely.
case for
100%.
that
Yep.
because without that, they may not even read the information. They
Yep.
may just ask the question, get the answer, pass it on. So I could understand like if there was a case, I could see the case where you might want to have them put it in their own words
Mhm.
or, like notate that they used AI and
Yep.
this is what they got and then translate it into a different, in my own
Yeah.
words kind of thing. I could see that, but
Yeah.
I think I don't know. I don't think it's cheating. I really I don't
Yeah.
find it cheating. I
No.
think it's using the tools at your disposal to find the information. That's how we all work.
Yeah.
That's when we're adults, when we need to, man, listen, if you need to change something on your car, that I mean, you look at it, it's just a little plastic piece of shit.
Yeah.
You don't really need a mechanic for it.
No, YouTube.
You
Right. Yeah.
yeah, YouTube it,
Yeah.
figure it out, and that is how we find solutions to problems, at our age.
Mhm.
And uh, these kids, they're going to have to figure out solutions to problems that we don't even know we have.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And
No, it's
and
true.
and these children growing up these days, they got a shit ton more problems than we ever thought about.
Yeah. No, I know.
Like the social media, the cell phones, the screens,
Yeah.
and the information, the amount of information that's out there.
Yeah.
Robert, I don't know how old you are, but I'm 39. I remember a time when we only had like 5 channels,
Yeah. No, for
and
sure. Yeah.
so we didn't have to suss out all the bullshit on
Yeah.
those 5 channels. That's
Yeah.
all we had.
Yeah.
These kids have so much information available to them, they don't know what's real and what's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. No, I'm
And
56. I
that's
think I feel. What's the old joke? I was the clicker. Hey, change the channel. And then I didn't know what to
absolutely.
do. So I remember. But yeah, no, it's kind of like if you think about it, I think about Rocket because, Ryan's 23, but the book, a lot of the book is about when he was Rocket's age, right? And that time just went so fast and so now fast forward, you'll be having this conversation with someone in 20 years and you'll be my age and Rocket will be 23, 24, and God only knows what the world is going to look like. I mean,
Yeah, we probably won't even be driving cars at that point,
yeah,
man.
no, self-driving.
They've got these flying cars now. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh,
yeah,
it's so exciting. I saw Cadillac had one. I think it was Cadillac, but it's basically a quad rotor copter with a seat in it. So
Jesus.
it's basically a drone that you strap
Uh,
yourself into, and
Unbelievable.
I looked at it and I was like, I would fly that,
Yeah.
and I can't wait for that technology. And I am I'm a commercial driver. I have my CDL. I don't
Mhm.
use it, but I have it. And I'm one of those type of guys where I used to love driving everywhere until I did it for a living.
Yeah,
And
I
then
would
it's like
imagine. Yeah,
I love it when my wife, like, I don't have to argue with my wife. I just like, you gonna drive? She's like, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And
nice.
she loves driving,
Yep.
and I think for her it's more of a safety thing. I don't pay attention when I drive. So
It's funny, ironic given you had a CDL.
exactly, exactly. So I'm gonna be driving down the road, and do something dangerous, and she'd be
Yeah,
like, and I'm like, you know what? Just go to sleep, take a
yeah,
nap. It will
yeah.
be there in one piece. Just
No, for
take a
sure.
nap.
No, but
And
now self-driving will take all of those jobs, and those trucks will run all night. No person will have to spend their night doing it, and that
I
probably will be good. I mean, the jobs will have to be replaced somehow, but the benefits, will traffic and life will probably be pretty good.
Yeah, yeah, I think it will change commercial driving for the better.
Yeah,
But with anything, when there's a large change like that, it's going to displace a lot of people at
yeah,
first.
for sure.
And I,
Yeah.
I don't know what the hell the government's
I
going to
don't I
do, but
don't either because lawyers and doctors will be replaced too. I mean, you know it's not you go to a doctor and a lot of times they're Googling things like that. That step can be skipped, pretty easily with, what here are my symptoms, and then boom, the pill's gonna come firing out somewhere and
yeah.
so
Yeah, and I actually, a lot of people, like Joe Rogan talks about it all the time, like, AI is coming for us, and
yeah,
I
no,
don't think I don't think jobs will ever completely go away. I think
yeah,
we're all going to need something to do.
no, it's
And
value, right?
what's that?
It's value in work. I mean, they
Yes,
have to have
yes,
something, you know, it has to be something that you feel good about
absolutely.
doing.
Well, and I think AI is going to suck at content creation as well. I don't
Mhm.
think it could, because it I don't know if you've noticed, but Hollywood lately has really, really been bad.
Yeah.
And it's because they keep recycling the same old bullshit in a
Yeah.
different package. And there's
Yeah.
no originality, there's no imagination, there's none of that stuff. And so AI is not going to be any better at that than we are.
Yeah. No, no,
It's
that's
just, they're not. I,
no. My
I, I
wife,
just
my
don't.
wife comes down every night and says, "How can you be watching The Sopranos again? You've watched these episodes 7,000 times. Like, there's nothing else. There's nothing that's better than this. I'd rather watch this again than the crap."
Absolutely. And that's kind of how I feel when football is over. I'm a big NFL fan. I'm actually Chiefs fan. Go
Well,
Chiefs.
you got a big Sunday coming up. I'm jealous. So
Yes, yes.
it's tough being terrible now. All of a sudden we're terrible. We were
Yeah,
always
I
in the
was
mix.
just getting ready to
Yeah,
say, you're up
yeah.
there in New England. You
I
guys had a
know.
long, like, 20-year stretch
I
where nobody
know.
could touch you. So,
I know. It's been weird. It's in a way, it's like it's freeing in some ways. Like all of a sudden your Sundays aren't predicated on that, and it's kind of nice. But then when something like this rolls around, you're like, I don't even want to watch this game. I hate both these teams. I don't, I don't know
yeah,
which
there's
team I hate more. I think I hate Philly more because Philly's like a Boston thing with Philly. And Mahomes is pretty likable, and Reed
absolutely.
is too. So. Like, I guess I'll root for them, but it's a little tough all of a sudden to be
So,
irrelevant.
yeah, I remember a movie. I can't remember which movie it was. I think it was The Waterboy, actually, where Rob Schneider, he plays a character and he's like, oh no, we suck again.
Yes, it's true.
Yes.
In my childhood, I mean, people forget, like we were bad. The 70s, the 80s were not a great decade in New England. And all of a sudden, we had this run where not the Patriots were great, the Red Sox were good, and so, Celtics and Bruins were pretty good. And but it was such a dominant part of my life. It is kind of some ways it is a little nice not to care so much. And I go back to Ryan a lot, but Ryan would look at me during the Patriots heyday, and I would live and die. Like it was like, it's like life or death. He's like, why do you care? Like, it's like, why do you care so much? Just you don't know any of these people. You don't, But it's I don't know. When you're in the region, like I'm sure Kansas City's like this right now. It's like everybody's in it together, and there's something really fun and social about it,
Oh
and
yeah, we are like our local schools. Now, I live an hour outside of Kansas City, an hour north of Kansas City, in a town called St. Joseph, Missouri. And it's a population of 75,000, give or take. And we just literally last week, they had an emergency schedule change for our schools to accommodate the Super Bowl if we win. There's no even if we lose, that
Yeah.
still they're going to keep the schedule, but they changed the schedule
Yeah.
to accommodate the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
live an hour outside of Kansas City.
Yeah.
Like Arrowhead is like 45 minutes from my
Right.
house.
Yeah.
So it's it's very cool,
Yeah.
but very strange at the same time because I couldn't imagine this happening when I was a younger kid, you know,
Yeah.
like the Royals won
Yeah.
the
I
World
remember.
Series in
Yeah.
'85,
Yeah. I
and
remember.
I was born that year,
Yeah.
so I missed out on that.
Oh,
But
yeah.
my parents got to see it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then in 2015, we won the World Series again,
Yeah.
and it was like my kids get to experience the same thing that my
Yeah.
parents did,
Yeah.
and it's an amazing feeling. And you know, the Royals had a great year, a great
Yeah.
season last season, and it looks like they're building up again to
Yeah.
make another run at it. And like the Red Sox, man, you know, it took them what almost
Yeah.
100 years to get out from
Right.
underneath that
Yeah.
curse. But
Yeah.
and then New England, like you said, back in the '70s, they were kind of bad.
Terrible. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you get to watch. It is a very strange feeling, but it's a very awesome feeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you can come together with your community and it's something as silly as
Yeah.
football or
I know.
baseball.
Right.
It really brings out the best in people.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, walking down the street, I know there's probably not a lot of football fans in the city that I live in, but everybody's wearing a Chief shirt, whether
Right.
they're fans or not.
Yeah.
And the ones that aren't fans that are just wanting to be there supportive, they're wearing Taylor Swift shirts or,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
it's insane. And
Yeah.
I love every bit of the feeling that I get, that
Yeah.
pride. And it, like you said, it's an amazing feeling, but at the same time, I know one of these days, you know, Patrick Mahomes is going to
Right.
wrap it up
Yeah.
and it's going to be over. But
I know.
the good thing about it is we didn't really suck. You know, the
Yeah.
Kansas City Chiefs didn't
Yeah.
really
They've been good.
suck.
Yeah.
They were decent, and
Yeah.
they've my whole life they've been contenders.
Mhm.
So it will be a little bit different, I think. But you know, Mahomes is young. You know,
Right. You'll
Tom
get
Brady
10 more
didn't.
years of this. I mean, yeah, no, there's no.
Yeah, Tom Brady didn't retire until he was
Yeah.
what, 45.
Yeah, no, and
So
he could probably play today. I mean, like if they stay healthy and they have to. And Mahomes reminds me a little bit of Brady was so motivated by winning that the second he won, he still wanted to win the next one. Like he never was
yes,
one of these guys. And there are guys who winning changes them, and it's natural, right? But there's just a few these sort of Derek Jeter types, the Brady types that they're just Jordan like maniacal about winning that and they never change and the money doesn't change them and the fame doesn't change them and it's rare, it's really rare. And if Mahomes is one of those guys and you'll see it, and I think you're right, I have, because he's won enough where he'd gotten fat and lazy and he'd still be in the Hall of Fame, right? But
absolutely. Like I think I've heard it a few times this year, especially from like Nick Wright. Nick Wright's from Kansas City, so he's a big fan. Like if Mahomes wins the Super Bowl and never plays again, he could be in the conversation for
yeah,
the greatest
yeah,
quarterback of all
yeah,
time,
absolutely.
right there with Tom Brady,
Yeah,
because of the way he has won, the way he has changed the game,
yeah,
the way like Tom Brady didn't dominate like Patrick Mahomes is. Like he had his off seasons and he had his bad games, but when you know we're really spoiled in NFL football when Patrick Mahomes wins 15 out of 17 games and we're talking about how bad he's been.
yeah, it wasn't a great year. Yeah, they're saying he wasn't even in the MVP conversation. No, that
Yeah,
was kind of ironic. Yeah, no, that is. I think what will motivate him. Brady won seven. That to get to eight is going to be the number, and that's probably going to take him through the rest of his career, and that's good. It's good to have that reason to fight because otherwise, I think it is easy at this point. He's got everything, right? It's at some point, and it's a tough sport, right? Your physical health. is on the line every game. And I think, Brady for some reason took that to change how he lived, right? His diet and all this crazy stuff he did. It was in an effort to play another day, right? It wasn't, he just was that kind of a crazy person.
And he
And so,
still looks great. He still
yeah,
looks
no,
like he's in
if you look
playing
at
shape.
pictures from when he was 20 to now, it almost looks weird. Like
And he aged backwards. He looks
yeah,
better
it's
now
a
than he
little
did in his
freaky.
20s.
Yeah. No, but I remember him on podcasts, and Sports Radio years ago. He was one of these, seed oil guys before anybody was a seed oil guy. Like he was talking about processed foods, and they would make fun of him. He'd hang up the phone, and then all the hosts would mock him. He wouldn't eat tomatoes and all this crazy stuff. And
Avocado ice cream.
yeah, like all that crazy stuff. But you look at him and you're like, okay, maybe there's a reason because, the guy doesn't have a wrinkle on him.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. And I'm actually a big Tom Brady fan myself.
Yeah.
When the Chiefs were out, I would vote or vote. I would root for New England because I was a big Tom Brady fan.
Yeah,
And
no,
not only Tom Brady, but I was a big Rob Gronkowski fan.
yeah, no,
Like
no,
Rob Gronkowski, there towards the end of his career, every time he would take a nasty hit, you'd see pieces of shrapnel flying
yeah,
off
no,
of
the
him, and
guy, yeah,
it
no,
was
it's
an incredible
amazing
sight.
that he can string a sentence together. Yeah, no, it's he that position. I mean,
I actually
he,
don't think Rob Gronkowski. I think that's an act. I think Rob Gronkowski is a very brilliant guy,
oh
and I
yeah, no, I think
think,
so too. Like, but just he must have had 50
oh
concussions. Like,
yeah,
because it took three guys to tackle him, and it was always that last guy. When he's sort of like going down, and then the last guy would come in. And back then the hits were different, I think. But he got out, I think, probably in time, and I think he probably could have played another couple of years. But for what? It's at this
yeah,
point he's had a
yeah. He
pretty
went
good
out on top,
career.
and
Yeah,
like
and he's
Tom
making
Brady,
it.
actually, like we were. Tom Brady at the end of his career was still a top five quarterback.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
we were
Yeah,
talking about him like he was old and
yeah,
washed up,
yeah,
and it was because we had other players like Patrick
yeah,
Mahomes and Josh Allen
yeah,
and Lamar Jackson, and those guys are so good. It's like it looks like you have to understand, you have to watch, almost look back at the 20 years that Tom Brady played with New England, and you almost have to take that in stride and watch those games and watch how good he was
yeah, definitely.
to get a sense of, because these quarterbacks have spoiled us,
Yeah.
you know.
It's a
And
quarterback league. If you have a, if you don't have a quarterback, there's no chance of winning. Maybe you'll win 6 games or something, but you're not going to win a playoff game, and you're not going to
yeah,
compete. And it's not that easy to draft. I mean, it's these guys are first round picks, but not all of them hit. Probably a third of them hit, and the other 2/3 are busts. And it's really good. If without that, I don't care how good your defense is. I don't care how, the rest of the skill positions don't even matter, right? So
yeah,
hopefully we're getting there, but you never know. It's like some of these guys, they you think they're there and then they regress. It's
yeah.
they've got to keep making progress, and the game changes around them. I think it's they have to adjust to rule changes and
That
different
the rule
defenses.
changes is a
Yeah,
big one because like it's not even the same quarterback league as it was. Like Tom
yeah,
Brady, when he was playing, like he took some massive ass
yeah,
hits. And
yeah,
I remember one hit that he took, his helmet went flying, his
yeah,
body went flying this way. And I'm like, how is he even getting up? Like he just got right back up and started
yeah.
going, let's go, let's go.
Yeah.
And I'm
No,
like,
the hit when he missed the season was that hit's now illegal. That
yeah,
you got at the knee. I mean, that's they made the rule after that, but that was we lost the whole year because of that. So it's Mahomes he's like somehow and he runs with the ball. Do you think like eventually,
and he's
but
such an ugly runner too. It's so
yeah,
funny.
but he's like made of rubber or something. He never seems to get hit square. He always seems to just kind of take the brunt of it, and
It's
almost
interesting that you say he's made of rubber because I call him Gumby sometimes.
yeah, he kind of does
So
look like that.
he did a quarterback sneak a while back, or like a few seasons ago, and blew out his knee.
Mhm.
And he was out for a couple weeks, but it should have been
Yeah, I
like a
remember that.
season ending
Yep.
injury.
Yep.
And there's something weird with his legs and his ligaments in his legs that they're
Yeah.
kind of stretchy. And
Yep.
so from then on, I started calling him Gumby.
Yeah. No, I
When
remember
he
that.
gets into those weird
I remember that.
situations, he's like it's some kind of double jointedness
Yeah.
with his
Yeah.
ankles and his knees.
It's
And
a,
I actually remember that. So,
yeah, definitely.
well,
It's,
Robert, this has been an awesome
yeah.
conversation. We're going to have to get
Fun.
together and do this again.
Yeah.
But
No, I think honestly I want to have you talk to Ryan. I think you get a kick out of him. I don't know if you have any guess that
absolutely.
age, but
No, absolutely. I've actually talked to a lot of people, but
yeah.
my my oldest son is he'll be 21 in a few days, and he's actually I think the youngest person that I've had on on the
Yeah.
show. But I would love to have Ryan
Yeah,
on.
definitely. Once a couple more months, ski season will be over. It's a lot easier to schedule at that point. But he'll talk to you from the van, and then
Oh,
you can
that
have
would
us
be awesome.
both on, and you can compare notes. And sometimes we differ in our recollections of things, and sometimes we agree. So it makes it interesting.
Well, hey man, there's a ski park not too far from here. I believe it's Snow Creek is what it's called, not too far from my house. If you guys are ever
Interesting.
in Kansas City
Yeah, no,
area,
he
look
has
me
this
up.
desire to ski in every state, so I'll have to mention that, see if he knows it. Um,
Absolutely.
I know
And
he's
I've got
bouldered.
capability to do a show here in
Yeah, that
studio.
would be
So
awesome. No, we'd love to. I'd love to do more of these in person. I hate Zoom, so I would much rather that. I know he drives cross country a lot, and he's driven through. God, is it Missouri? No, it might be Nebraska. There's a bouldering park that's somewhere that he always stops in the. It's tough to find. There's no rock climbing or skiing in the middle usually, but he did find this one particular thing.
the
So
Ozarks is I think the Ozarks is 3 hours, three maybe 4 hours from my house. So I
okay,
mean, hey, if you're
yeah,
ever coming through this
definitely.
way, look
You
me
never
up.
know.
We'll get
Awesome.
together, man.
That sounds great, man. Well, you stay well and your kids and wish you luck and we're gonna stay in touch because I wanna know what happens with Rocket. It's gonna be interesting to see and I think he's gonna be great.
For sure, brother. I appreciate you. Thank you very much, man.
All right, man. Talk to you soon.
We'll see you.